They say you can tell everything about a person's character by how they treat someone who can do nothing for them. I have found this to be absolutely devastatingly true, and the people who mistake that silence for weakness, who mistake that patience for ignorance, who look across a room at a quiet old man in simple clothes and see nothing worth respecting, those are always the most interesting people to watch. My name is William Hayes, and I have been that quiet old man my entire life, intentionally. I am 69 years old. I drive a 2003 Buick LeSabre that my daughter Serena has been begging me to retire for the better part of 3 years. It is silver. Or it was silver once. Now it is more of a silver-adjacent situation. The kind of color that happens when a car has lived a full life in the sun and the rain and doesn't particularly care what you think about it anymore. I wear clean clothes, nothing flashy, nothing that announces itself when I walk into a room. I live in the same house I bought 31 years ago on Elmwood Drive, a quiet street where the oak trees are older than most of the marriages in the neighborhood, and where people still wave at each other from their porches on Sunday mornings. My neighbor Bill Patterson, retired postal worker, good man, terrible golfer, once leaned over the fence on a Saturday afternoon and told me I was the most unfancy rich guy he'd ever met. I told him I wasn't rich. He laughed. I laughed. We talked about his tomato garden for 20 minutes, and I went back inside. Here is what Bill Patterson doesn't know, what my Sunday morning church friends don't know, what the young man at the dealership who once tried to sell me something newer didn't know when I smiled politely and said, "The LeSabre is just fine, son." I own Cornerstone Group, real estate, private equity, a media subsidiary, holdings across 4 states and 3 countries, structured through a network of companies so carefully layered that my name appears nowhere obvious, no Forbes profile, no charity gala with my photo on a banner, no profile in any business magazine with a headline about my journey to the top. I built it that way deliberately, brick by brick, decision by decision, over 4 decades of getting up before sunrise and going to bed after midnight, and never once confusing visibility with value. Cornerstone Group is worth $3.1 billion. I drive a car with a dented mirror and an air conditioner that does whatever it wants, and I would not change a single thing. Now, let me tell you about my daughter. Serena Hayes Cross is 34 years old, and she is, without any exaggeration, the finest thing I've ever built. Smarter than me, warmer than her mother, God rest her soul. She has this laugh that starts quiet and then takes over an entire room before she even realizes it's happening. When she was 7 years old, she negotiated an extra 30 minutes of TV time from me using a 3-point argument that I genuinely did not have a counter to. I remember sitting there thinking, this child is going to be dangerous one day. I was right. What I did not anticipate was who she was going to marry. 3 years ago, Serena brought home Aaron Cross. Now, I want to be fair to Aaron. I want to be measured and balanced and give the man his due. So, let me say this as generously as I possibly can. Aaron Cross is the human equivalent of a firm handshake that goes on just a little too long. He is 38 years old. 6 feet even. Good-looking in the way that men who spend considerable time in front of mirrors tend to be. He wears suits that fit him perfectly, and watches that cost more than some people's cars, and he has this habit of steering every conversation, every single one, back to something he has achieved, something he owns, or somewhere impressive he has recently been. Within the first 15 minutes of meeting me, he mentioned his MBA, his golf handicap, and the fact that he had recently been to a conference in Geneva. Geneva. He said the word Geneva the way people say it when they want you to know they have been to Geneva. I nodded. I said, "That's wonderful, son." 6 months after meeting Serena, Aaron Cross was appointed CEO of CrossPoint Logistics. Now here is where the story gets interesting, and I need you to stay with me here because this is important. CrossPoint Logistics is one of Cornerstone Group's subsidiaries, a solid company. 412 employees. Contracts with some of the largest distribution networks in the country. Good bones, real value. Aaron Cross got that job through what appeared to be a completely standard competitive search process. Recruitment firm, multiple rounds of interviews, reference checks, board evaluation. The whole process looked immaculate from the outside. What nobody knew, what Aaron Cross specifically did not know and still does not know to this day, is that I quietly controlled every single step of that process from beginning to end. I watched his interviews through a one-way arrangement with the recruitment firm. I reviewed his references personally. I read every evaluation the board submitted. I approved his compensation package. I signed off on his appointment. And then I went home, changed into my gardening clothes, and planted 3 rose bushes along the back fence. Aaron Cross became CEO of my company. He sent me a text that evening that said, "Big news. Just landed a huge CEO role. Serena is so proud. Hard work pays off." I replied, "Congratulations, son. Well deserved." Then I put my phone down and watched the evening news. I want to be honest with you about something. In the beginning, I genuinely wanted to give Aaron Cross a chance. I did. I am not a man who makes up his mind about people quickly. I have hired and mentored enough human beings in my lifetime to know that first impressions are just that. First impressions, people grow. People surprise you. I have been surprised before. Aaron Cross did not surprise me. What he did instead was show me, slowly and consistently, exactly who he was. It started small, the way it always starts small. Then came the evening at his company dinner, his company he believed, where he introduced me to his colleagues, and one of them, a young VP type with too much hair product, asked me what I did. Before I could open my mouth, Aaron said, and I quote, "He's retired. Serena's dad. Enjoy your evening, Mr. Hayes." And just like that, I was moved along, like a guest at a party who had wandered into the wrong room. I smiled. I moved along. I filed it away. But the specific moment, that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon about 4 months ago. I had stopped by CrossPoint's offices to handle something quietly through one of my holding company representatives. I was in the building. Unremarkable as always. An old man in clean, modest clothes who nobody looked at twice. And as I passed the corridor near the executive floor, I heard Aaron's voice coming from around the corner. He was talking to someone, another executive by the sound of it. I stopped. "Serena's dad?" Aaron was saying, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Oh, he's harmless. Poor old guy. Peaked early, I think. You know the type. Was probably somebody back in the day. Now he just potters around his garden and drives that old Buick." He lowered his voice, but not enough. "Serena feels responsible for him, which is, a lot sometimes. But what can you do? Family is family." Then I straightened my jacket, and I walked quietly back the way I came. Peaked early. Drives that old Buick. I let those words sit with me for 4 months. I am a patient man. I come from a long line of patient men. My father used to say, "William, the river doesn't fight the rock, it just keeps moving." And eventually, the rock is gone. I kept moving. If you've been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. It costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. The dinner invitation came on a Thursday evening. Serena called me excited, warm the way she always is. Aaron's parents, Gerald and Margaret Cross, were hosting a family dinner at their estate out in Westfield. Gerald was a retired investment banker. Margaret was the kind of woman whose entire personality was constructed around the square footage of her home. They wanted to get together, all of us. One big happy family. "Dad, you'll love them," Serena said. "They're very warm people." "I'm sure they are, sweetheart," I said. I already knew things about Gerald and Margaret Cross that would have made that sentence very difficult for Serena to finish. But I said nothing. I told her I would be there. I told her I was looking forward to it. Then Aaron called. He called me directly, which was already unusual enough to be interesting. He was friendly, casual. The way people are friendly and casual when they are about to say something they know is slightly offensive, but have decided to say anyway. "Hey, so, just heads up about Saturday," he said. "Gerald and Margaret, they're pretty, traditional, old school, so it might be worth maybe, I don't know, dressing up a little? Nothing crazy, just, something a bit sharper than usual." There was a pause. "Aaron," I said pleasantly, "I appreciate you thinking of me." Of course," he said, relieved. "Just want everyone to be comfortable. You know how it is." "I do," I said. "I'll see you Saturday." I hung up the phone. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror for a long moment. Then I went to my closet, moved past the suits in the back, the charcoal ones, the navy ones, the ones I wore when Cornerstone closed its largest acquisition 11 years ago. Moved past all of it. And I pulled out my simplest clothes. Clean, pressed, modest. I laid them out for Saturday. Then, I walked out to the driveway, patted the roof of the old Buick LeSabre twice, the way you pat the shoulder of someone you trust, before something important. "We're going to a dinner, old girl," I thought. "Dress code is humble. We've got that covered." Because here is what Aaron Cross did not understand. Here's what Gerald and Margaret Cross did not understand. Here's what nobody in that dining room was going to understand until it was far too late. I wasn't dressing down because I had nothing better. I was dressing down because I wanted to see exactly who they were when they thought nothing was at stake. And I had a feeling, a very quiet, very certain, 40 years in the making kind of feeling, that they were about to show me everything. Saturday was coming, and so was I. Saturday arrived the way important days always do. Quietly, without fanfare, like it had no idea what it was about to become. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning the way I have woken up every day for the last 40 years. Made my coffee, black, no sugar, the same way my father drank it and his father before him. Sat at my kitchen table by the window that looks out onto the garden and watched the morning come in slow and gray over the oak tree in the backyard. I was calm. I am always calm. It is perhaps the most underestimated weapon a man can possess. I dressed slowly and deliberately. Clean slacks. A simple button-down shirt, light blue, pressed the night before. My everyday shoes, polished but unremarkable. No watch worth mentioning. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror for a moment and thought, yes, that's exactly right. I walked out to the driveway. The LeSabre sat there in the morning light, silver and unhurried, the cracked passenger mirror catching a thin sliver of the early sun. I got in. The engine turned over with its familiar morning groan, that low rattling complaint that I have come to find oddly comforting, and then settled into its steady idle. Let's go see who these people are, I thought, and I drove to Westfield. The Cross estate sat at the end of a long private driveway lined with trimmed hedges that were maintained with the kind of aggressive perfection that communicates a specific message to anyone arriving. We are people who control things, even the hedges. I pulled the LeSabre through the gate and followed the driveway to the front of the house. There was a young man stationed near the entrance, not quite a valet, not quite a butler, but something in between, whose entire job appeared to be making arriving guests feel either welcomed or assessed depending on what they drove. He looked at the LeSabre, then he looked at me, then he looked back at the LeSabre with an expression I have seen many times in my life. The expression of a young man performing a rapid and unfavorable calculation. "Good evening, sir," he said, recovering professionally. "I can take your car around." "Thank you, son," I said, handing him the keys. "She pulls a little to the left. Don't let that alarm you." He nodded with the focused expression of a man trying very hard not to have any further feelings about the vehicle he had just been handed. I straightened my shirt and walked toward the front door. Gerald Cross opened it before I could knock. He was a tall man. 72. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, the kind of physical presence that had probably commanded rooms effortlessly for most of his life. He was dressed in that particular way of wealthy men at home. Expensive casual, the kind of clothes that cost more than formal wear but are designed to look relaxed. His smile when he saw me was warm, practiced, the kind of smile that is assembled rather than felt. "William," he said, extending his hand. "So glad you could make it. Come in, come in." His handshake lasted exactly as long as it needed to and not 1 second more. I noticed. The house was everything the driveway had promised. High ceilings. Art on the walls that was chosen to be impressive rather than loved. A staircase that curved upward with the quiet confidence of a staircase that knows it is being admired. Every surface communicated the same thing. We have always had this. We were born into this. This is simply what our life looks like. Margaret Cross appeared from the direction of what I assumed was the sitting room. She was elegant in the way that certain women of a certain generation and tax bracket are elegant. Assembled, precise, not a single detail unconsidered. Her jewelry was understated in the specific way that very expensive jewelry is understated, which is to say, it was not understated at all. "William," she said warmly, taking both my hands in hers the way people do when they want physical contact to substitute for actual sincerity. "We have heard so much about you. You are just as sweet as Serena described." Sweet. There it was. First word out of her mouth. Sweet. Not impressive. Not accomplished. Not interesting. Sweet. The word people use for golden retrievers and elderly relatives who don't quite follow the conversation anymore. "Thank you, Margaret," I said warmly. "You have a beautiful home," she beamed. People who have built their identity around their possessions never tire of hearing their possessions complimented. Serena appeared from across the room and crossed to me immediately, wrapping her arms around me the way she has since she was 4 years old. I held on to that hug for just a moment longer than usual. "You look great, Dad," she whispered. "So do you, sweetheart?" I said. Aaron materialized behind her. He looked at my outfit with an expression he controlled very quickly. Just a flicker, half a second. But I caught it the way I always catch things. A brief, pained look that said I specifically asked him to dress up, followed immediately by the recovery smile. "William, glad you made it," he said, clapping me on the shoulder the way men do when they are performing warmth for an audience. "Come on in. Gerald just opened something special." Something special. I would come to understand that this was the theme of the evening. Everything, the wine, the food, the house, the family, was something special. Everything except me. We moved to the dining room. The table was set with the kind of deliberate formality that takes hours to arrange and is specifically designed to make certain guests feel the gap between themselves and their hosts. Crystal glasses, heavy silverware, candles that had probably never been lit before tonight and would likely never be lit again. I sat down, I unfolded my napkin, I looked around the table at these people who had invited me into their home, and I became invisible. Not because anyone made me invisible, because I chose it. I have spent 69 years learning that the most dangerous thing a man can do in a room full of people who underestimate him is correct that underestimation too soon. So I sat, I smiled, I asked polite questions, I complimented the wine I had not yet tasted. And I watched. Gerald led the conversation the way men like Gerald always lead conversations. From the front, loudly, with the absolute confidence of someone who has never once been told he was talking too much. He spoke about the markets, about a recent trip to Scotland, about Aaron's extraordinary instincts at Crosspoint. "The boy has completely transformed that company," Gerald said, swirling his glass. "The board respects him enormously. I always knew he had it in him. Leadership is in the blood, I believe. Just, informatively, the way people look at you when they want to establish a contrast without having to say it directly." I nodded appreciatively. "That's wonderful," I said. "You must be very proud." Then she turned to Serena with a smile that had a very specific shape. "And Serena, you must feel so secure. Having a husband who provides so well. It's such a blessing. Not every girl is so lucky." The table went slightly quiet for just a fraction of a second. Serena smiled graciously, but I saw her eyes. I saw them. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip and said absolutely nothing, because the envelope hadn't arrived yet. And I knew, with the quiet certainty of a man who has been patient for 40 years, that when it did, everything at this table was going to change. I just had to wait a little longer. There is a moment in every long game when patience stops being a virtue and becomes a verdict. That moment arrived with dessert. I had been sitting at that table for 2 hours. 2 hours of nodding, 2 hours of smiling, 2 hours of asking questions I already knew the answers to, and complimenting wine I didn't particularly care about, and laughing at Gerald Cross's stories that weren't quite as funny as Gerald Cross believed them to be. I had played my role flawlessly. The sweet old man, Serena's retired dad, the fellow with the funny car who peeked early and potters around his garden on Sunday mornings. I wore that role like a comfortable jacket all evening, and not one person at that table suspected for a single second that underneath it was something else entirely. Then Gerald reached beneath his chair, and I felt it. That quiet internal shift that I have learned to recognize over 40 years. The shift that happens when a situation moves from prologue to story, when the thing you have been waiting for finally arrives. He placed the leather-bound document on the table, smoothed it once with his palm, and slid it across to me. "William," Gerald said, his voice dropping into the measured register of a man who has rehearsed this moment. "There's something we'd like to discuss. As a family." I looked at the document. I did not touch it yet. Margaret's hands were folded on the table. Aaron had straightened in his chair with the posture of a man trying to look casual about something he is not casual about at all. Serena glanced at me, quick, uncertain, and then looked back at her father-in-law. I looked at her hands in her lap. They were not still. "Aaron has a vision," Gerald continued. "A real vision. An independent venture, his own company built from the ground up. The kind of opportunity that only comes once in a man's life. We believe in him completely." "As you should," I said warmly. "What we need is startup capital," Gerald said. "And what we're proposing," he nodded toward the document, "is a relatively straightforward arrangement. Serena's inheritance, used as collateral to secure the initial funding. Fully legal, properly drawn up, above board in every way." He paused, leaned forward slightly. "We just need your blessing, William." As Serena's father. Then at Margaret, whose smile had the fixed quality of something applied rather than felt. Then at Aaron. Calm, certain, already mentally spending money he had decided was his. And I thought, you have absolutely no idea who you just handed that envelope to. I picked up the document, opened it, read every single page slowly and deliberately, while the candles flickered and the clock on the wall marked every second, and nobody at that table dared say a word. I read every carefully worded paragraph, every number. Then I closed it, set it gently back on the table, picked up my water glass, took a slow, unhurried sip, and looked at Gerald Cross with the warmest smile I own. "I appreciate the thought that went into this," I said pleasantly. "I'll review it carefully." Gerald exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for an hour. Aaron's shoulders dropped half an inch. Margaret reached for her wine with the relieved energy of a woman who believes the hard part is over. They thought they had won. I finished my water, made pleasant conversation for another 20 minutes, thanked Margaret for a wonderful evening, shook Gerald's hand, a full handshake this time, firm, my eyes holding his just 1 second longer than necessary. He didn't know what that second meant. I walked out to the driveway. The young valet brought the LeSabre around with the expression of a man who had spent the evening quietly judging my car and had now made his peace with it. I tipped him well, more than he expected, and watched his expression change. I got in. The engine groaned, the air conditioning thought about it and declined. I pulled out of that driveway and drove home through the dark, quiet streets, and I was so calm it probably would have frightened people who knew what I was about to do. I said nothing for 14 days. Not a word, not a reaction, not a single visible ripple on the surface of my life. I tended my garden Sunday morning, had coffee with Bill Patterson Wednesday afternoon, went to church, drove the LeSabre to the grocery store and back. On day 4, Aaron texted me. "Hey, William, just checking in. Hope you had a chance to look at the proposal. Exciting stuff, right?" I waited 3 hours. Then I typed, "Still reviewing, son. These things take time." He sent a thumbs up emoji. I set my phone down and made a phone call. Not to Aaron, not to Gerald. To 3 very specific people. The senior members of the Crosspoint Logistics Board of Directors. Men who had known me for years. Men who understood that when I called directly, it was not a social occasion. "Run the audit," I said quietly. "Standard cycle, full scope. Begin immediately." Then I hung up and went back to my garden. Because here's what I knew that Aaron Cross did not know. What Gerald and Margaret Cross, sitting in their estate in Westfield, celebrating over expensive wine, did not know. I had written Aaron's employment contract personally. Every clause, every line. Including one buried deep in the document, a non-compete and fiduciary duty clause that Aaron had signed 3 years ago without reading carefully enough. A clause I had written 15 years before Aaron Cross ever entered my life. A clause designed precisely for men who believe they are smarter than the room they are standing in. I had been patient for 15 years. I could wait 14 more days. What the audit found took 11 days to fully document, and when the final report landed on my desk, I sat with it for a long time. Not because I was surprised. I was not surprised. I sat with it because I wanted to be sure, completely, absolutely sure, before I did what came next. Aaron Cross had been building his independent venture for 8 months. On company time, on company devices. Using Crosspoint's internal contacts and client relationships to construct a business that would directly compete with Cornerstone's holdings. Carefully, quietly, believing with complete confidence that nobody above him was watching. He had forgotten something that I consider fundamental. You cannot build something in secret inside a house that belongs to the man you are hiding it from. Every meeting, every document, every contact made on company time, all of it a direct violation of the clause he had signed, all of it documented, all of it sitting in a folder on my desk on a Thursday morning when I put on the charcoal suit from the back of my closet, pressed the night before, and drove the LeSabre to Crosspoint Logistics. I parked in the reserved space out front. The one with the small placard that read, Cornerstone Group, Reserved. The one Aaron Cross had driven past 3 times a week for 3 years without once asking whose name belonged to it. I walked into that conference room, and I sat at the head of the table, board members to my left, legal team to my right, the audit findings in a folder in front of me. And in approximately 4 minutes, Aaron Cross walking through that door believing he was arriving for a routine check-in. I straightened my jacket. I waited. The door opened. He walked in carrying his usual confidence like a coat. Easy, natural, fitted perfectly to his shoulders. He scanned the room, took in the board members, the lawyers, the documents on the table, and then his eyes found me, sitting at his table, in his conference room, in a suit he had never seen me wear. I watched it happen in real time, the understanding moving across his face in slow motion, floor by floor. The recruitment search, the contract, the audit. Gerald's proud smile, the envelope sliding across the table. Every single moment of the last 3 years arriving all at once in that conference room. On a Thursday morning, the silence lasted 10 full seconds. I let every one of them land. Then I said quietly, "Sit down, Aaron." He sat. "I'm going to say this once," I said. "Not because I'm angry. I want you to understand that. I am not angry. Anger is for men who didn't see this coming. I saw this coming from the moment you slid that car printout across my kitchen counter 3 years ago." I opened the folder. Crosspoint Logistics is owned by Cornerstone Group. Cornerstone Group is owned by me. Has been for 19 years. The company you run, the salary you earn, the reputation you have spent 3 years building your entire identity around, exists because I built it. I appointed you because I believed in what I saw. I gave you every resource you needed to become something real. And for 8 months, you used those resources to construct something designed to compete against the very foundation that made you. I closed the folder. The clause in your contract covers every single thing the audit found. Our legal team is prepared to pursue this to its full conclusion if necessary. Every trace of the confidence he had walked in with was gone. He looked, suddenly, and for the first time since I had known him, very young, very small, very far from Geneva. "However," I said, "I am not interested in destroying you. I am interested in clarity. So here's what happens next. You resign, today, quietly, professionally. Your reputation stays intact, and this stays between these walls, or we proceed legally and everything in this folder becomes part of a very public record." He looked at the board members, neutral. He looked at the lawyers, neutral. He looked back at me and I saw something in his eyes that I had not expected, and that I will be honest, it moved me slightly. Not anger, not defiance, not the performance of a man trying to salvage a situation. Shame. Real shame. The deep, quiet kind. The kind that only comes when a man finally sees himself with complete clarity and does not like what he finds. "I'll resign," he said. Quietly. Like the words cost him something. "Good," I said. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, picked up my folder. "One more thing," I said at the door. "The proposal your father presented at dinner. Serena's inheritance as collateral. I let that sit for exactly 1 second. My lawyers transferred her inheritance this morning. Directly into her name. Irrevocably. In a personal account that requires her signature alone, Gerald's proposal is now a document about money that no longer exists where he believed it did. Tell your parents I said thank you for dinner. The lamb was excellent." I drove home in the Le Saber. The engine cleared its throat at the first start. The air conditioning came on briefly and then reconsidered. The cracked passenger mirror caught the last of the afternoon light as I turned onto Elmwood Drive and pulled into my driveway. I sat in the car for a moment. Just sat. 31 years of being the man nobody looked at twice, and knowing exactly who I was the entire time. I patted the dashboard once. Good girl, I thought. Then I went inside and called my daughter. She arrived 20 minutes later and found me at the old wooden kitchen table. 2 cups of tea already poured. She sat down across from me and looked at my face for a long, careful moment, the way she has looked at my face since she was 4 years old, reading it like a map she has known her whole life. From the beginning, the company, the structure, the cross-point appointment, the contract clause I had written 15 years ago, the audit, the boardroom, the inheritance transfer, every piece of it laid out quietly. When I finished, Serena was silent for a long time. Then Serena looked up at me and asked the question, the only question, the one I had been carrying the answer to for 30 years. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me about any of it?" I looked down at my cup, looked out at the dark garden, looked back at my daughter, at her mother's eyes in her face, at the laugh that takes over rooms, at the 7-year-old who out-argued me over television time and won. "Because I wanted you to choose your life," I said. "Not have it chosen by what I own. I never wanted you to look at me and see a company. I wanted you to see your father." She cried. I held her hand across the table and I let her. And I thought about Gerald Cross sitting very still in that estate in Westfield. Margaret setting down her wine. Aaron finding the words to explain to his parents why the quiet old man in the simple clothes had turned out to be the one person in that dining room they should never, not for one single second, have underestimated. I thought about all of that, and then I let it go, because the only thing in the world that mattered to me was sitting right across this table, hands wrapped around a warm cup, eyes red, smiling through it. My daughter, the finest thing I ever built. Some men don't look powerful. They just are. And the ones who underestimate them, they always find out. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. I'll see you in the next one.